Hi, and welcome to Chapter 1 for Psych 150. We have a PowerPoint here that I'll kind of go through fairly quickly. It's 27 slides, which is way too much for this, but just give you some basic overview. This is a great tool to have available as an outline of the chapter when you do your online quiz. Okay, so I would recommend that you consider that as you go forward. So let me get into this and see what we can do to get through it in a fairly efficient way. Okay, so psychology is really the study of what's called the psyche, which is the soul, not soul as we refer to it in today's religious traditions, but soul in terms of the being, the brain, consciousness, as you can see, memory, language. Soul of what's happening there. It's a study of that. So it's what's happening in your brain and your heart, really, is what that's about. Okay, so that's really the study of it. I know there's a question on the quiz about that, so hint, hint. This is another great slide to have in terms of the different perspectives in psychology, and also some of the names associated with them. So there's structuralism, which really talks about the structure of the brain. Functionalism is how it operates. So we'll have Wundt and William James are those two people. Psychoanalytic, we most have heard about Freud. We'll spend a little bit on that. Gestalt, which is Wertmeyer, Kafka, and Kohler. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Okay. Behavioralism, Pavlov, Watson, Skinner. Most of us know Pavlov's dogs or Skinner rats. Okay. Watson is the baby who gets scared from rabbits. And humanism, which is a study of really what's innate, okay, which means what's inside, what people are experiencing internally. Okay, so and these are kind of in order of their development. Okay, so maybe help a little bit with that too. Wundt, again, I'll mention this several times here. It's important to note that. Notice something familiar about all the people around this table. One, they're men. Two, they are white. Okay. Three, they're older. So older white men are the ones who began a lot of the early research in this. Not until about the 1960s did we get into cultural psychology, feminist psychology, some of those things that really looked at things other than old white men. So a lot of things we're going to talk about are going to start with them. But hopefully we'll be able to move into an area which we'll talk more about how things are operating in today's world a little bit. But it's important to understand that bias that's there. Okay. So functionalism. Let me go back. Structuralism is really about how the physiological brain. Okay. And they did a lot of work where they would feel someone's head, and the bumps on their head would tell them about their personality. Of course, we don't do that anymore, but that was kind of how things operated, kind of in that time frame. But it began the process of studying behavior. Okay, so that's why it's important. And functionalism was really got into how things operate. How do the hemispheres of the brains operate? How does the cognitive process work? So how do we think about things? Right, left brain kind of stuff started in this time frame, although it wasn't really brought to fruition until much later. Okay, but that was the idea there. Sigmund Freud was really about subconscious or unconscious. He spent a lot of time dealing with the ego and superego. And just to help you with that a little bit is that how I look at it, and I remember it, is the id has a D in it. That stands for devil. And so if you had those cartoons where you had a little angel on one shoulder, devil on the other, and the devil would be saying, "Oh, come on, do it. Come on, do it. You're okay. You're okay." And the angel would be saying, "No, you're going to get caught. Mom's going to see you, or someone's going to see you. The police are going to see you." And then which is your that is your superego, okay, which is your supernatural, okay, it's how I remember it. And then as your ego is your something that's in the middle. And it takes the id and the superego and comes up with, here's what I'm going to do. The id is always telling them to take risks. The superego is always saying to no, slow down, be careful. And the ego in the middle is saying, here's what we're going to do. So that's kind of a way to look at it a little bit. Sigmund Freud was working at Rorschach tests were big for him, where the ink blot test that he did, and we'll spend a little more time on that as we go through it as well. Here's Freud and his world. Gestalt was about Gestalt's the whole, and it was they started to put stuff together now. So how does the unconscious deal with the functional and the structural aspects of the brain? And started to get some ideas of how learning works. And so that was very early on in the process. And also they dealt with sensation perception. So we all know that people can watch the exact same thing happen and come away with a very different idea of what it was about. A lot of that's based on histories, and we'll talk about that when we get into learning. A lot of it's based on their perspective, their references, and some of it is based on their cognitive abilities, how deep they're willing to or able to go deeply into the topic. So anyway, that's sensation perception. Pavlov and his dogs. So these are some acronyms to kind of be aware of. BC, before conditioning. Okay, unconditional stimulus is UNCS or UCS. I'm sorry, UNCS. So the food comes in front of a dog, and the dog salivates. The salivate is an unconditioned response. It happens naturally. That'll happen every time you give a dog food. They'll begin to salivate. Okay, maybe it's not always dripping down their face like this, but they'll be salivating. Then what you do is you introduce a bell. Now the bell has no response on the dog without some other thing linked to it, and that's what's called a neutral stimulus, which is NS. Okay, then there's no conditioned response. Okay, so you give the dog a food, you get salivation. You ring a bell, there's nothing. Okay, now you pair the bell with the food, and every time you give the dog food, you ring a bell. Now all of a sudden, that becomes a conditioned response, which conditioned stimulus, which equals conditioned response. The bell becomes a conditioned stimulus. Now you ring the bell, and the dog will salivate. Okay, so if you ever have a pantry door where the dog food's kept, or some other sliding glass door, or whatever, letting the dogs in and out, those are what are called conditioned stimulus, and the response of the dog is the conditioned response. So I know my dog, if I open up the pantry door, he will come running, okay? And because he knows he's going to get fed. The pantry door by itself doesn't mean anything, but it has been conditioned to mean food for him, okay? Or her, actually, sorry, Lucy. And then there's Watson, which what he did is he paired a loud bang. I don't think it's here, but he compared a loud bang with a soft furry animal, and the little baby that was there first saw the soft furry animal and was laughing and whatever. Then the sound was paired with the soft furry animal, and then every time the baby saw the soft furry animal, the baby started to cry. Same baby, same stuff. So what Watson did is he paired the loud gong, loud noise, with the animal, and it eventually became a conditioned response. The baby would cry, okay, because of that. Okay, that's kind of what he did through his stuff, and we'll spend more time on that later too. And there's Skinner, who had what's called the Skinner box, or the rats. He was able to, through a sense of reinforcement, he was able to teach the rat how to pull the lever based on lights going off, which would give them food. Okay. Some of it was sounds, some of it was lights, and some of it was. So here are the learning styles, right? Here's auditory, here's visual, and here is kinesthetic. He was able to teach the rat to get food using any one of these three levers by pairing the sound with the food distribution. Okay. Anyway, he was able to do that. That was called operant conditioning. And the way I look at it is OS, operating system, is operating conditioning. OS, operant for Skinner. Okay. Pavlov is the dogs, and so that's the other one of, we're still in behavioral. And we have Maslow. This is interesting. Maslow, most of you probably heard of this, is hierarchy of needs, and this is kind of the world here according to him. But basically it is that we have to have our physiological needs met. before we can really move on. And his idea was once you have these met, then you can move up to this level. Have those met, you move to this level. So someone who is homeless, doesn't have water, shelter, and are freezing is not going to really worry about getting a job, not going to worry about safety. They're really not going to worry about some of these other things too. It would seem to us to make common sense that if I get a job, I can get rid of this stuff. Okay? But according to Maslow, we're so focused on meeting these needs that the idea of getting a job is really not important. So people say, why don't you just go get a job? It doesn't quite work that way. It's very simple for people who have a job to say, go do that, because they're probably somewhere in this range right here. Okay? They may not have enough food, but they have food, they have water, some type of shelter, and usually some type of warmth means up into here. Now, some of those people are up into here, and they just say, well, go get a job or whatever. And it's, and that's not the case in everybody. And again, this is Maslow's thinking. But once you get these things, now you can start thinking about family and friendship and those kind of things and having relationships and so on and so forth. Then you get up into here where your confidence starts to build, your self-worth starts to build, and then you reach this point of self-actualization, which really very few people, according to Maslow, ever reach that point, okay? So basically, it's the physiological all the way up through the self-actualization, and you move up according to fulfilling the previous need, okay? And that's Maslow humanism. Then Carl Rogers, he created something called the client-centered therapy, and this is about, have you ever been in therapy? And I have, and many other people have. One of the key questions they ask you, well, how does that make you feel? My mom's always yelling at me. Well, how does that make you feel? Okay, that's client-centered therapy. It's really about you. It's not about them. It's not about Rorschach tests. It's not about behavioralism. It's not about positive reinforcements, negative reinforcements. It's about you and how you feel and how to deal with it. Okay, that's Carl Rogers. Then they have this whole cognitive revolution, which is really kind of where we're going now. Chomsky came up with this idea of how do we think? What's involved in thinking? What's involved in learning? How do we put together perception and cognition and behavioralism, all these areas together and to make up the bigger picture of who we are? So part of our initial little quizzes that we did, and certainly none of those are comprehensive in any one way, but I hope it starts to give you an idea that we're pretty complex. And even how we learn, and you guys are in the middle of learning right now, how do you learn? How you learn can be based on all these different aspects. Locus of control. If your focus comes from external, internal, self-efficacy. What's your level of confidence? What's your self-esteem? What's your self-value that you have? And left and right brain and learning styles and so on and so forth. Those all come together to figure out what kind of a learning being you are. Okay. So anyway, that's where the whole thing is kind of going right now. These are the different branches. Okay, and you can see these here. Most of you know some of these. Ones that are interesting are industrial organizational. That's how to design offices. So the whole world went to cubes a lot of years ago, where cubicles were there, and there were industrial psychologists and organizational psychologists were focused on that. Sports and exercise, that's really big today. That's visualization. Many people that are involved in really, let's say, individual sports like figure skating or gymnastics. Many times they have visualization exercises that they do, and they go through that. That's part of this world here. Clinical, of course, we know that. That's when people were doing research and really trying to figure it out. Now, forensics is kind of interesting. Forensics is something that deals with mostly legal aspects. So when they're trying to figure out, let's just say recently we've had the issues going on January 6th at the Capitol. Forensic psychologists are working at trying to figure out why these people did what they did. What drove them over that step to be a loud vocal group to being a physical and a violent group. That's what forensic psychologists do. They also work with attorneys when they're selecting juries, and they look at a person's let's say MO, I was going to say, but they look at the person's background and whatever, and they come up with an idea whether that person might vote in favor of or against whatever, whether they're defense attorneys or prosecutors. Okay, that's forensic psychology in just a nutshell. Um, Developmental, another class, that's from kind of from really from conception till death. Okay, is really where that goes in our particular thing. So anyway, those are some of the basic ideas in that. Okay, and that kind of gives you an idea of psychology in general. Here's some of the others that are there. Just this is perception. Think about this a little bit. When you first saw that, what did you see? Some of you saw a duck. Some of you saw a rabbit. It's the exact same picture, and yet people saw different things. The duck is, here's the bill, okay? Here's the eyeball. The rabbit, here's its mouth, nose, here's its ears, here's its eyeball, and here's its ears. This is how you can look at the exact same thing and see something different. Okay, and that's a real problem for our society today when people talk about things like fake news or whatever. There is a truth in there, and but this particular one could be or. So the truth here would be this could look like a rabbit or a duck, depending on your background. Okay. Yeah, so we'll get more of that later when we get into those chapters. And then there's cognitive. These deal with these things here. We'll spend a chapter kind of on each one of these almost as we go through this whole process here. But just to know that's what's there. And then developmental, as I mentioned, Piaget. He has all of his aspects of growth. He has this. Well, it's a 5-factor model, but he goes to some length to define how we develop as basically from babies to early adulthood, and the different stages that are involved and that all of us go through. And we'll talk more about Piaget later, but just kind of link him up with developmental psychology. Then we have something called the 5-factor. This is really getting into personality psychology. This is an important acronym, OCEAN, OCEAN. These are spectrums. This is not a one or the other. If person is low score openness, they are practical, conventional, and they prefer routine. Okay. Someone is very high score. They're curious, wide range of interest, and independent. This would be someone who would be more of a visionary, more of a creator. This is someone who is very, very happy doing the same thing a lot. Okay. Could be a factory worker, where this could be a major artist, or someone who works for a marketing firm developing advertisements. And so you see openness, conscientiousness, extroversion. This is introversion, extroversion. This is an important distinction we make here. Extroversion, introvert, there isn't a plus or a minus. Now, the MBTI, you have got to score introversion, extroversion. Introvert is someone who gains their energy by being in a quiet, reserved environment. Okay? Gains their energy. An extrovert is someone who gains their energy by being in a party, being where everything's going on, a lot of people around. Okay? So that's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. And there isn't one is good and bad. The extrovert isn't always the real outgoing, nice person. They can be a very mean and ugly person, but they get their energy by being in groups of people. Many times introverts are misunderstood because they're thought to be not caring, they're thought to be not interactive, and so people think, well, they just kind of blow them off because they're not involved. That's the spectrum that's there. It's where we gain our energy, not what our actual outward behaviors are. Okay, there's agreeableness and neuroticism. You can take a look at those. Social psychology. This is an ad. I spent some time on this on Milgram and on the Stanford study. Milgram was studying why Nazi soldiers and officers carried out marching the Jews into a gas chamber, 50 at a time, and killing them, and then hauling their bodies off and dumping them into a big mass grave. I can't imagine someone doing that. This shows you, and we'll get to Milgram later, where we'll talk about this a little bit, but basically he was able to get people to electrocute other people to a voltage that would kill them. Okay, now this was all mock situation, based on the fact that they were just being told that that's what they're expected to do. Now, he didn't do that first time. He had to build up to that. but it was a study on why these people did what they did. It could be a study on what's happening in our country today. What about police officers? We know that the great majority of them are really good people, but some of them maybe are not behaving so well. Maybe there's some issues with the Stanford study, which we'll look at in a little bit, about people following authority level and how mean and ugly people can get once they get into those roles. And again, by any means, I'm not putting down all police officers, whatever, but there certainly are some people who get into roles of authority that change their personality based on the role they're in and their expectations. That's what the Stanford study was doing going forward. So we'll talk about that in social psychology. Health psychology, kind of takes these three things in, and people. So this is the Noom thing that's out there right now. Noom kind of gets you to try to sit in this middle area. You talk about social stuff, psychological stuff, and biological stuff. How you eat. Put down your technology while you're eating, so you can focus just on eating socially. Be able to interact with your people around you. Why do you eat? Many of us overeat because we are bored, because we're depressed, because we have different things going on. That's where this whole thing plays into, and that's the sweet spot here is where the Noom program tries to get you. Clinical, this is where they put emotions, thoughts, and behaviors together. As you can see, these things all go around and around. Okay, all of them influence the other one. Okay, your emotions influence behaviors, which influence your thoughts. Your thoughts influence behaviors, which influence emotions, and so on and so forth. And we'll spend more time with that as we go in there too. Different careers. You can see some of the different aspects here of careers and different employment that is required to get to those careers. Okay, so that is chapter 1, kind of in a brief nutshell. Please spend some time looking through the chapter in the book, reviewing these before you take your quiz, and that way it'll go much quicker. But that's chapter 1. Okay.